Issues leading to the War of 1812. Now, if you're going, oh my gosh, how are we getting to the War of 1812? We haven't talked anything about, going to war with Great Britain. Kind of keep in mind, up until this point, we've talked a few times, or we've looked at a few times, like this issue of being pro-France, being pro-British and everything like that. And so that's where some of this is coming into play. So, by 1803, Britain and France are back at it again, and the United States is caught in the middle of this conflict, but they very much wanted to supply both sides. In fact, the United States during this time becomes the world's largest carrier of neutral goods. They are really dominating commerce. Their exports are soaring. They're making a lot of money off of this until the Chesapeake incident. In 1807, a British ship, the Leopard, is going to order a United States frigate, the Chesapeake, to submit to a search. Now, this doesn't happen in the middle of the Atlantic. This is happening literally in the coastal waters of Virginia. The Chesapeake, the American ship, is going to refuse, and the Leopard is going to open fire. 3 Americans are going to be killed in this attack, and then the British actually go aboard the Chesapeake, and they would impress 4 Americans. Kind of. It depends, once again, how you define Americans, because that gets really complicated. Are they British? Are they American? And everything like that. It turns out later on, the British would admit that only 1 of the 4 was probably a British subject, and they ended up releasing and returning 3 of them back to the United States, and the one who was a British subject actually would be hung for treason. So, this incident, there's a lot of popular outcry for revenge against the British. But Jefferson needs to respond carefully to this because he is aware that this could cause the United States to go to war. So instead, he's going to bar American ports to British warships and calls for monetary compensation as well as an end to impressments of the American people. He really viewed the country as not being ready for war. From there, afterwards, you get the Embargo Act of 1807. This was an act passed by Congress. Basically, it was a policy of peaceable coercion. It would prohibit American ships from leaving port to any nation until Britain and France repealed their trading restrictions on neutral shippers. Now, the idea here is that, because America had become this huge carrier of neutral goods, that Europe is so dependent on American goods and foods and raw materials that if America cuts them off from all of those items, Europe would do America's bidding. This was really unrealistic, quite frankly, and it was actually incorrect. The thing is, yes, this non-exportation movement, so to speak, is going to hurt Europe, but not necessarily those in power who would just spend more to get their goods from other places. And more than that, it actually hurt a lot of American export trade, of course. And so that means that a lot of American profits dry up with this blockade. In fact, while all would suffer under the embargo, New England shippers and merchants in particular are going to suffer. And this actually revives the Federalist Party, who actually went against Madison in 1808 because Jefferson did his 2 terms, and Madison steps in up for the Jeffersonian Republicans' next presidential candidate. But Madison is going to win, basically carrying the South and the West. Now, before taking office, Republicans are going to go ahead and abandon Jefferson's whole Embargo Act of 1807, and instead they're going to replace it with the Non-Intercourse Act. So rather than not shipping any items to anyone, basically the Non-Intercourse Act would prohibit American trade just with Great Britain and France. However, once Madison was in office, Madison does try to make a deal with a British representative. It becomes clear he's overstepped his boundaries and everything like that, but it kind of opens up the door for maybe changing from this Non-Intercourse Act. And that is what's going to happen in 1810 with Macon's Bill number 2. Now, Macon is spelled like bacon, but with an M at the beginning. Basically, with Macon's Bill number 2, America is going to throw open American trade to everyone, including Great Britain and France, but they're going to stipulate that if either France or England lifted their restrictions against the United States, the president would basically resume trading sanctions only against the other side. So, for example, what happens is Napoleon promises to lift these trading restrictions against the United States, and so the United States is going to reimpose non-intercourse against the British accordingly. See how that works? The thing is, as much as Napoleon made this promise, Madison was under no illusion about Napoleon's honesty in all of this, but he was hoping that by reapplying trading restrictions against the British, this might apply some sort of pressure for them to match the French's concessions. But really it just worsens tensions between America and Great Britain. So I want you to think once again, at this point in time, who do you trust more at this point? Britain or France? Who are you trusting more? Are you more pro-British, pro-France? Or take the other extreme and say, I'm anti-British or I'm anti-French. And then we have other issues going on at this time. The thing is, we're going to see in the West, the Northwest, a pan-Indian resistance movement comes about. And this is going to frighten a lot of Western settlers on the eve of the War of 1812, and they're going to blame the British for inciting this movement. That was not the reality of the situation. What really had caused and triggered this movement more than anything else was the Americans' unceasing demand for more and more of the Native Americans' land. For instance, 1795, that whole Treaty of Greenville, the American government had promised that any future acquisition of land that had been owned by the Native Americans would be approved by all Native peoples in the region. Yet, despite this promise, America is basically going to continue to play different Native American groups against each other and encourage division within so that they can take over land afterwards. In fact, William Henry Harrison, future president of the United States, and at that point was the governor of Indian Territory, is going to procure most of southern Indiana with the Treaty of Vincennes in 1804 exactly in this way, by playing Native Americans off of each other. This is what causes the pan-Indian resistance movement. Basically, pan-Indianism was the idea that white encroachments had to be stopped. And in order to do so, basically tribal and clan divisions should be submerged or wiped away, and that Native Americans should return to their own native rituals and belief systems. So it's a rejection of European systems and a return to their own culture, and that in this way Indian land could be saved and even self-respect and culture regained, but like I said, through only tribal cooperation and a spiritual rebirth. Now the thing about this, if you look at that description and everything, this is meant to be peaceful. However, in 1811, William Henry Harrison is going to march an army onto Prophetstown and provoke the Battle of Tippecanoe. Now, this battle might not have happened had the Native American leader Tecumseh been present. However, he was absent at the time, and impetuous young braves basically attacked Harrison's army. There are heavy losses on both sides, but Harrison's forces prevail. Tecumseh at this point, though, would join forces with the British, leaving the frontier even more unsettled. So, I have a quote here. Basically, hatred of Native Americans, expansionist pressures, a lingering agricultural depression, and impatience with the administration's policy of economic coercion all pointed to a war against Britain, coupled with the ideas of an American takeover of British Canada, as well as an American takeover of Spanish Florida. Oh, actually, this should have been on the last slide, but that's okay. We're going to see war hawks in Congress. War hawks were members of Congress in 1810 that were basically predominantly from the South and the West, so you can guess which party they're predominantly for, who are going to aggressively push for war against Great Britain. In 1811, because of this, Madison, the President of the United States, is going to try to lay like some sort of groundwork for this impending war. Yet, the war hawks, who, and really a Republican-controlled Congress, didn't want to strengthen the military or raise taxes to pay for the war. So very much they wanted this war, but they didn't want to have to pay for it. Madison and many of the other Republicans are going to see this impending conflict as almost like a second war for independence. Yes, this war is going to be fought about having free and open access to world markets, but a lot of it's also about national pride and specifically ending like the British impressments of American civilians, because that's humiliating to American honor. Still, a divided Congress is going to declare war on Great Britain, and the South and the West are really going to favor the war, as you can see the vote here to the right. In fact, New England, you can see, generally opposes the war, and in fact, 9/10 of the Republicans in Congress are going to vote for the war. Not a single Federalist voted for the war. In fact, many Federalists actually saw France as the real enemy because France had actually seized more American ships than the British had. On top of that, Great Britain had also revoked 1 year of its Order of Councils against the United States. But the problem is this particular act doesn't actually address the whole issue of impressment or monetary compensation, and news of it basically reached America too late to avoid war. So too little, too late. Quick note before we get into the next PowerPoint, which is all about the War of 1812. The thing is, both sides in this were extremely unprepared to fight this war. Both sides are going to bungle their invasions into the other. By 1814, both sides have basically secured their own original land and were eager for an end to this conflict. On top of that, we're going to see internal problems within the United States as well. The Federalists would be very frustrated, especially in New England, and for New England's sake, because they're going to have the brunt of the war right on their back doorstep, so to speak. And unfortunately for the Federalists, there's going to be a small brush of Federalists joining in a small secessionist movement, and this basically tars the Federalist Party with a brush of treason, and thus actually the Republican Party ends up emerging even more powerful after this war than before it.